My fiancé's phone rang during our wedding vows with the most romantic, spicy ringtone I'd ever heard. I was standing at the altar, crying happy tears, looking into the eyes of the man who made me feel seen like nobody ever had. He started his vows, talking about how I was the sun of his solar system. Right as he said those words, his phone started ringing. "Pony" by Ginawine blared through the church. Every single person turned to stare. Norman's face went white. He fumbled with his pocket while the grinding beat echoed off the walls. Finally, he silenced it. "Who was that?" I asked. "Wrong number. Probably spam." "Norman, that's a custom ringtone. You assigned that song to someone specific. Show me the phone." He pulled it closer to his chest. "It's nobody. Can we just continue?" "No. We can't." I grabbed my dress and walked off the altar. Norman followed me into the church lobby. Both families rushed after us. "Was it another woman?" I asked. "No, I swear." "Then who was it?" Norman's mom pushed through the crowd. "It's his cousin Rebecca. She's overseas." I stared at her. "He has that song saved for his cousin?" She stuttered about an inside joke. "That's disgusting, and you know you're lying." I tried to grab the phone. He jerked away and it slipped, flying into the decorative fountain. The screen went black. Norman actually looked relieved. My maid of honor, Claire, stopped everyone. "If that call was just your cousin, why are you happy the phone is dead?" "I want the truth," I said, "or this wedding is over." Norman was shaking. "I can't. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay," he broke. "The woman's name is Vanessa. She's the mother of my child." The words didn't register. "What?" "I have a son. He's 4 years old. I never told you." My family exploded. I couldn't breathe. "But why does she have that ringtone?" "I said it years ago. She never calls, so I forgot to change it." "That doesn't explain why you were panicked." Norman looked sick. 3 months ago, Vanessa came back to town. We slept together. Once. My dad lunged forward, but my brothers held him back. "Why was she calling you today?" His mother answered. "She's pregnant." My knees buckled. Claire caught me. I pulled out my own phone. "Give me her number. Right now." Norman gave it to me. I called on speaker. The lobby went silent. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered. "This is Norman's fiancé. I'm at the altar right now. Is it true?" Long pause. "He didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" Vanessa laughed, tired. "I'm not pregnant." "I called to warn you. Norman's been telling people I am, so he has an excuse to stay connected to me. He's been showing up at my apartment for months saying he wants to be a family again. I told him I'd call you if he didn't stop." "So there's no second pregnancy?" "No. But everything else is true. The son, the affair, all of it." I hung up. Norman started talking fast. "Baby, I can explain. You lied about a pregnancy to cover up stalking your ex?" "It wasn't stalking. You have a 4-year-old son you hid from me for 2 years. You cheated on me 3 months before our wedding. And when you got caught, you invented a fake pregnancy." He reached for my hand. I stepped back. "The wedding is off." His mother started wailing. His father dragged him toward the exit. My family surrounded me like a wall. Claire helped me out of the church. I was still wearing my dress when we got to her car. She didn't ask where I wanted to go. She just drove. We ended up at a diner. I sat in a booth in my wedding gown eating pancakes at 4 p.m., mascara running down my face. The waitress just kept refilling my coffee. Claire sat across from me. "What do you need?" "I need to know how I missed all of this." "You didn't miss anything. He hid it. That's not the same thing." I thought about the past 2 years. Every time Norman got quiet when his phone buzzed. Every business trip that seemed too long. Every time his mother looked at me with something that wasn't quite warmth. They all knew. I finished my pancakes and walked out into the parking lot still wearing my dress. "What now?" Claire asked. I looked down at the white fabric, the beading I'd spent months choosing, the train dragging through gravel. "Now I take this off," I said, and I never looked back. Claire's apartment was smaller than the place I'd shared with Norman, but it felt safer somehow. I sat on her gray couch in my wedding dress and stared at the coffee table without really seeing it. My phone kept lighting up on the cushion next to me. Norman's name flashed across the screen again and again. Then my mom's name. Then my dad's. Then numbers I didn't recognize. I picked up the phone and turned it face down, but I could still feel it buzzing against my palm through the fabric of my dress. Claire brought me a glass of water and set it on the table in front of me. I didn't drink it. She sat in the chair across from me and didn't say anything. The silence felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. I looked down at the white beading on my dress and thought about how I'd tried on 17 dresses before finding this one. Norman had come to one of the fittings even though everyone said the groom wasn't supposed to see the dress. He'd told me I looked beautiful, and I'd felt so lucky that he couldn't wait. Now I wondered if he'd been checking his phone the whole time, texting Vanessa while I spun around in white fabric. My phone buzzed again. I turned it over and saw Norman's face on the screen. The photo from our trip to the mountains last fall. I'd taken that picture right after he told me he loved me for the first time. I pressed the power button and held it until the screen went black. The dress felt too tight suddenly. I stood up and reached behind me for the zipper, but my hands were shaking too much to grab it. Claire got up and walked over without me having to ask. She unzipped it slowly and the fabric loosened around my ribs. I could breathe again. I stepped out of the dress and stood there in my white underwear and strapless bra, looking at the pile of expensive fabric on Claire's floor. She picked it up carefully and started folding it. I watched her smooth out the wrinkles and arrange the train. She was treating it like it mattered, even though we both knew I'd never wear it again. I sat back down on the couch in my underwear and pulled the throw blanket over my legs. Claire finished folding the dress and set it on the chair. She sat next to me and we didn't talk. The clock on her wall ticked past 7, then 8, then 9. I kept thinking about the past 2 years. Every time Norman's phone rang and he'd step into another room to answer it. Every weekend he said he had to work late. Every time his mom looked at me during family dinners with this expression I couldn't quite read. They all knew. His whole family knew he had a son, and they watched me plan a wedding and never said a word. I thought about Vanessa's voice on the phone, tired and matter-of-fact. She hadn't sounded angry or jealous. She'd sounded like someone who'd been dealing with Norman's lies for a long time and was just exhausted. I wondered what she'd told their son about his dad. I wondered if the kid knew Norman was supposed to get married today. The thought made my stomach hurt. Claire got up around midnight and came back with sweatpants and a t-shirt. I put them on and the dress stayed folded on the chair like a ghost. We sat on the couch and Claire asked me if I wanted to talk about it. I started going through everything in my head out loud. The business trip to Chicago that lasted 5 days when it should have been 3. The time I'd surprised Norman at his office and he'd seemed annoyed instead of happy. The way he always kept his phone face down on tables. The random Tuesday nights he said he had to help his brother move furniture or fix his dad's car. I'd believed all of it because why wouldn't I? People don't lie about helping their family. Except Norman did lie about his family. He lied about having a son. He lied about sleeping with Vanessa. He lied about her being pregnant. He'd probably lied about 100 other things I hadn't even figured out yet. Claire listened and didn't try to make me feel better with fake comfort. She just let me talk. Around 3 in the morning, I finally stopped talking, and we sat there in silence. My eyes felt dry and scratchy. I was too tired to cry anymore. Claire brought me a pillow and another blanket, and I lay down on her couch. She went to her bedroom and I heard her door close softly. I stared at the ceiling and watched the shadows from the streetlight outside move across the white paint. I thought about how this morning I'd woken up excited to marry Norman. Now I was sleeping on my best friend's couch in borrowed clothes and my whole life was different. I woke up to sun coming through Claire's living room window. My neck hurt from the couch pillow and my mouth tasted awful. I reached for my phone before remembering I'd turned it off. I held the power button and waited for it to come back on. 17 missed calls, 12 from Norman, 3 from his mom, 2 from my mom. I had 14 text messages. I opened the one from Norman's mom first. It said we needed to talk about misunderstandings, and that Norman was devastated, and that I should give him a chance to explain properly. I deleted it. Norman's texts were long paragraphs about how sorry he was, and how he never meant to hurt me, and how we could work through this if I just gave him a chance. I didn't read all of them. I heard Claire moving around in her bedroom, and then she came out wearing her robe. She looked at my face and asked if I'd checked my phone. I nodded. She went to the kitchen and started making coffee without saying anything else. The smell filled the apartment and reminded me of Sunday mornings with Norman. We used to make breakfast together and read the news on our phones, and it had felt so normal and comfortable. Now I couldn't tell which parts of that had been real and which parts had been Norman playing a role. Claire brought me coffee in the blue mug she always used for guests. I wrapped my hands around it and felt the warmth. She sat in the chair with her own mug and told me I didn't owe anyone explanations right now. I knew she was right, but I also knew I couldn't hide at her apartment forever. Eventually, I'd have to deal with the wedding vendors and the apartment I shared with Norman, and all the practical pieces of a life I'd been building with someone who didn't exist. My phone rang and my dad's name showed up on the screen. I answered it and he asked where I was. I told him I was at Claire's. He said he and my mom were coming over. I said okay, and hung up. 20 minutes later, they were knocking on Claire's door. My mom hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe, and my dad stood behind her looking like he wanted to punch something. Claire let them in and made more coffee. We all sat in her small living room, and my parents told me that Norman's family had tried calling them last night. His dad had left a voicemail saying there had been a terrible misunderstanding, and that Norman loved me and wanted to make things right. My mom said she'd called back and told them there was no misunderstanding. Norman had lied and cheated and hidden a child. Those were facts, not misunderstandings. My dad said Norman's dad had tried to argue that Norman had been planning to tell me about his son after the wedding. My dad had hung up on him. I felt grateful that my parents were angry on my behalf because I was too tired to be angry anymore. I just felt empty. My mom asked what I needed and I didn't know how to answer. I needed the past 2 years to be different. I needed Norman to not be a liar. I needed to not feel this stupid for missing all the signs. But I couldn't say any of that, so I just shrugged. My brothers showed up an hour later with garbage bags full of my stuff. They'd gone to the church and collected everything from the bridal room, and then they'd gone to the apartment while Norman was out. My oldest brother set the bags down in Claire's entryway and told me they'd grabbed clothes and my laptop and some other things. He said Norman had come home while they were there, but they'd finished packing and left without talking to him. My middle brother said it had taken everything in him not to say something. I thanked them, and they both hugged me. My youngest brother asked if I needed them to do anything else. I told them no. They left after making me promise to call if I needed anything. I looked at the garbage bags full of my life and felt overwhelmed. Claire helped me drag them into her bedroom, and we started going through them. My brothers had grabbed things randomly. 3 pairs of shoes, but not the ones I wore most. 5 t-shirts, but none of my jeans. My laptop, but not the charger. I pulled out a framed photo of me and Norman from last Christmas and stared at it. We looked so happy. I set it face down on Claire's dresser and kept unpacking. By afternoon, I knew I had to start dealing with the practical mess. I found a notebook in one of the bags and sat at Claire's kitchen table. I started writing down everything that needed to be canceled or dealt with. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, the honeymoon flights and hotel, the apartment lease that was in both our names, the joint bank account we'd opened for wedding expenses. The list kept getting longer, and I felt my chest getting tight. Each item represented something I'd planned and looked forward to. The venue where we were supposed to have our reception. The flowers I'd spent hours choosing. The honeymoon in Italy that Norman had suggested because he knew I'd always wanted to go. Every single thing on the list was a piece of the future I'd thought I had. I got to the bottom of the page and added one more item. Wedding dress alterations I'd already paid for. I'd never need the final fitting now. I put the pen down and put my head in my hands. Claire came over and looked at the list. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she suggested I call the wedding planner first. Valeria could help coordinate with all the vendors. I didn't have to make every call myself. I looked up at Claire and felt a rush of gratitude. I'd been so focused on the list that I'd forgotten I'd hired someone specifically to handle wedding logistics. I found Valeria's number in my phone and called before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring and said my name like a question. I told her the wedding was canceled and I needed help dealing with the vendors. There was a pause, and then her voice came back softer. She said she'd heard what happened. One of the guests had called her yesterday to ask about getting their gift back. Valeria said she was so sorry and she wanted to help however she could. I felt my throat get tight, but I didn't cry. I told her about the list and asked if she could handle contacting everyone. She said most vendors had cancellation policies in their contracts. Some deposits would be lost, but she'd do her best to minimize the damage. She asked if I could write a brief statement she could share with the vendors so she didn't have to explain the details over and over. I said yes and thanked her. She told me to send the statement whenever I was ready, and that she'd start reaching out to vendors this week. We hung up and I felt a tiny bit of the weight lift. At least I wouldn't have to call the florist and explain that my fiancé had a secret child and a side relationship. Valeria could just say the wedding was canceled due to personal circumstances and leave it at that. That evening, I was sitting on Claire's couch trying to write the statement for vendors when the intercom buzzed. Claire got up to answer it, and I heard Norman's voice through the speaker. He was asking to talk to me. Begging, really. His voice sounded desperate, and I felt nothing. Claire told him to leave. He kept talking, saying things had gotten out of hand and he just needed 5 minutes to explain. Claire said if he didn't leave, she was calling the police. I heard him say my name through the speaker, pleading. Claire pressed the button to end the call and came back to the couch. She asked if I was okay. I nodded. I pulled out my phone and looked at Norman's texts again. He'd sent 6 more since this morning. All of them were variations of the same thing. He was sorry. He loved me. He wanted to fix this. He never meant for things to go this far. I read them all and felt that same emptiness. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. I opened a new message and typed that we would communicate only through email about practical matters like the apartment and our shared belongings. I hit send and put my phone down. 30 seconds later, it rang. Norman's face filled the screen. He was calling instead of respecting the boundary I'd just set. I stared at his photo for 3 rings. Then I blocked his number. The phone stopped ringing. I felt a small surge of something that might have been power. It wasn't much, but it was the first time since yesterday that I'd made a choice that was entirely mine. The next morning, my phone rang while I was still in bed at Claire's place. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice introduced herself as the venue manager. She said Valeria had contacted her about the cancellation, but she wanted to reach out personally. I sat up and waited for whatever bad news was coming. She explained they couldn't refund the deposit because the contract was clear about cancellations within 2 weeks of the event. My stomach dropped. Then she said they were willing to apply the full amount to a future event if I wanted to reschedule within a year. I actually laughed out loud. The sound came out harsh and bitter. She went quiet on the other end. I told her I appreciated the offer, but I wouldn't be getting married there or anywhere else anytime soon. She said she understood and that she was sorry about what happened. I thanked her and hung up. The idea that I'd ever want to walk back into that venue made me feel sick. I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what I actually owed and what I could get back. Claire made coffee and sat with me while I went through every contract and receipt. The numbers kept getting bigger. I called my cousin Nadia around noon. She's a lawyer who specializes in contracts. She said she could meet me that afternoon. I got dressed in actual clothes for the first time in days and took the bus to her office downtown. Nadia's assistant showed me to a conference room with big windows overlooking the city. Nadia came in a few minutes later carrying a legal pad. She hugged me first and then sat down across from me. I handed her the folder with all my wedding contracts. She put on her reading glasses and started going through each document. I watched her face for any sign of good news. She took notes and made small sounds while she read. After 20 minutes, she looked up and said most of the vendors had solid cancellation clauses. I was probably out about $15,000 in deposits that were clearly marked as non-refundable. The number hit me like a punch. $15,000 gone because Norman couldn't tell the truth. I felt physically sick. Nadia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She asked if I wanted to pursue any legal action against Norman. I could potentially sue for fraud or emotional distress. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then I told her I just wanted to be done with him. I didn't want months or years of court dates and lawyers and seeing his face. Nadia nodded like she expected that answer. She said she understood, but she'd put together some information for me anyway in case I changed my mind later. She pulled out a folder and explained what my options would be if I decided to go that route. I took the folder and thanked her. She didn't charge me for the consultation. She said family doesn't pay family. I left her office feeling both grateful and defeated. At least I knew where I stood financially now. 3 days after the wedding that didn't happen, I had to go back to work. I couldn't hide at Claire's apartment forever. I got up early and put on work clothes that felt strange after days in sweatpants. The bus ride felt too long. I kept thinking about what I'd say when people asked questions. My boss had texted saying to take all the time I needed, but I'd replied that I wanted to come back. Sitting around thinking about Norman was worse than being busy. I walked into the office and felt every eye turned toward me. People who normally said good morning looked away. My boss saw me and immediately came over. She pulled me into her office and closed the door. She said again that I could take more time. I told her I'd rather work than sit at home. She studied my face for a moment and then nodded. She said to let her know if I needed anything. I went to my desk and tried to focus on emails. My hands were shaking. Around 10, a coworker named Jessica stopped by my desk. She had this bright smile on her face. She said she saw the wedding was supposed to be last weekend and asked how married life was treating me. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my face get hot. I told her the wedding didn't happen. Her smile disappeared. She asked what I meant. I said it got canceled at the altar. Her expression went from confused to shocked to horrified in about 3 seconds. She started apologizing and backing away from my desk. I told her it was fine, but she kept saying sorry. Other people nearby had heard. I could feel them staring. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Jessica finally left and I put my head down and pretended to work. The rest of the day crawled by with people either avoiding me completely or giving me sad looks. I'd never been so happy to leave work in my life. That evening, I was scrolling through social media when a message popped up from someone named Milo. The name seemed familiar. I clicked on his profile and recognized him from pictures with Norman in college. My first thought was that he was reaching out to defend Norman or make excuses. The message said he needed to talk to me about something important. He said it was about Norman and he knew I probably didn't want to hear from any of his friends right now. But he promised he wasn't reaching out to defend him. Something about the way he wrote it seemed genuine. Not like he was making excuses. I stared at the message for a long time. Finally, I wrote back asking what he wanted to talk about. He replied almost immediately. He said it would be better to meet in person if I was willing. He suggested a coffee shop downtown. I told Claire about it and she said to meet him somewhere public and let her know where I was. I agreed to meet him the next day after work. The coffee shop was busy when I got there the next afternoon. Milo was already sitting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw me and shook my hand. He looked nervous. We both ordered coffee and sat down. He thanked me for meeting him. Then he said he'd been feeling guilty for months. I asked him why. He explained that Norman had told him about Vanessa and the kid last year. He said Norman mentioned it casually like it was something I already knew about. Milo had even asked Norman once how I felt about the whole situation with his son. Norman told him I was fine with it, and we were working on integrating his kid into our lives. Milo believed him. He said he only realized a few days ago that I'd had no idea. One of Norman's other friends had mentioned how shocked I must have been to find out at the altar. That's when Milo understood that Norman had been lying to everyone about what I knew. He looked miserable telling me this. Milo kept talking. He said Norman used to talk about me and Vanessa in this weird way. Like he was comparing us. He'd make comments about how different we were, how I was organized and driven and Vanessa was more spontaneous and emotional, how he got different things from each of us. At the time, Milo thought Norman was just talking about his past relationship versus his current one. But now looking back, it seemed like Norman was talking about 2 ongoing relationships. I felt cold listening to this. I asked Milo if he thought the hookup 3 months ago was really just once. Milo looked uncomfortable. He said he didn't know for sure, but Norman had mentioned seeing Vanessa multiple times in the past year. Always with some excuse about co-parenting or their son needing something. Milo had thought it was innocent at the time. Now he wasn't so sure. I sat back in my chair and felt the weight of it. The cheating probably wasn't one mistake. It was probably ongoing. I asked Milo why he was telling me all this now. He took a sip of his coffee and said Norman had called him yesterday. Norman spent 20 minutes painting himself as the victim, saying his private business got exposed unfairly, saying people were overreacting, saying I'd embarrassed him in front of everyone. Milo said Norman showed zero real remorse. He was just mad that he got caught. Milo told Norman he was wrong and Norman got defensive and hung up on him. That's when Milo decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He said he felt like he'd been part of the lie by not questioning things sooner. I told him it wasn't his fault. Norman had lied to everyone. Milo still looked guilty, but he nodded. We finished our coffee and I thanked him for telling me the truth. He said if I ever needed anything or wanted to talk to reach out. I left the coffee shop feeling worse than when I'd arrived. Every new piece of information just showed me how blind I'd been. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on Claire's couch staring at the ceiling. Finally, I grabbed my phone and started going through old photos. Pictures from the past 2 years with Norman. I looked at them differently now. In one photo from 6 months ago, Norman was checking his phone with this secretive expression. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. In another photo from a work trip he'd taken last spring, his smile looked forced. I remembered he'd been unreachable for hours that weekend. He'd blamed it on bad cell service. There were so many little things. Times he'd angled his phone away from me. Nights he'd come home later than expected with vague explanations about traffic or a work thing running long. Calls he'd taken in another room. I'd trusted him, so I'd never questioned any of it.